Bauer's view assumes that the heretics somehow knew that they were heretics and that their form of Christianity was different from others. This was Bauer's assumption. As we have seen, though, this is hardly the case, and it's not the case. Every form of early Christian heresy seems to have begun with the idea that it, and it alone, had preserved a kernel of truth teaching inherited from Jesus and the original disciples. They weren't deliberately setting out to be heretics, in other words. They believed they had the true teaching. But there was no unification of thought on this. There never was one true teaching of Christianity of who Jesus was, what he did, what he said, etc. The heretics could cite Scripture with equal force and sometimes with greater insight into their original meaning. Their mutual discovery that other Christians had different beliefs was a surprise to one and all. Hence, some modern scholars have favored a view that there was a basic set of common propositions that was treated with some degree of flexibility down as late as the 2nd century after Christ. Others have seen diversity as the basic dynamic of development from the very beginning. You see, even the scholars recognize that there are differences here. John Gager puts it this way: one unfortunate consequence of some of our modern discussions of this concept of heresy versus orthodoxy has been a tendency to regard the phenomenon of heresy as a detour that deflected the church's energies from more important matters. But if we examine it in the broader context of social conflict and institutional development, we may learn to appreciate it in a rather different light here. Quite apart from the common sense assumption that some amount of conflict is inevitable in any form of social existence, and this is true, it's now possible, however, to argue that conflict serves a positive function in solidifying social groups and in shaping the complex symbolic and institutional apparatus that is needed to sustain these groups. Put in its strongest terms, this means that if the church had not encountered heretics, it would have created them. In other words, the debates over heresy and orthodoxy were a necessary byproduct of diversity and growing consolidation of the movement in both of the social and the theological aspects of the early Christian movement. Here's something else that we Christians tend to forget, and it's important to keep this in mind. He says on page 437, White notes, "It must be remembered that Judaism in the period before 70 of the Common Era was rife with sectarian division. But in the aftermath of the failed revolt, there was a greater tendency to limit sectarianism. And the reason why, of course, because this pulls together, this restores the ethnic and the religious identity of the people. You got to realize, when Titus came and destroyed Jerusalem, he absolutely wiped it out. He tore everything apart and scattered everybody from here to breakfast. So the idea is, well, we can't have diversity of thinking now. We have to come together and unify. It was this period of rabbinic consolidation, scholars say it happened between 90 and 150 of the Common Era. This was the time when the followers of the Jesus movement began to find themselves more and more marginalized. Yet sects always stress tensions with their parent culture and use religious ideas and symbols as markers of true and false teaching. Being ostracized by dominant authorities can easily be reinterpreted by sectarians themselves to show all the more that they are right." So it's really interesting that it was the 4th generation, it was hundreds of years later, that witnessed the sharper delineation of orthodoxy and heresy among Christians. For 400 years, there was a varying modes of interpreting and understanding Jesus Christ. Was he fully human? Was he fully God? See, that technically wasn't settled until the Council of Chalcedon in the late 300s of the Common Era, We're talking the same amount of time there as we have from the signing of our Declaration of Independence here in America to today. Well, that's a long gap of time, you see. The questions of who should be in and who should be out, who is teaching the truth and who are the heretics, who are we going to anathemize? Oh, and when you read these early Christian accounts from the early church fathers, really seriously, they are constantly saying, well, no, we have to believe this particular way about Christ, and anathema, in other words, send them straight to hell, condemn them, tear their soul apart, destroy your enemy. So much for Christian love, right? They're always anathemizing themselves. They're always arguing and bickering. They're always pulling dirty tricks on each other, backstabbing, politicizing this process, double jeopardy with everybody. They're double crossing each other. Your best friends the one moment, the next moment you're finding the bishop guilty of some kind of a sin that you set him up to commit, so on and so forth. I mean, it's horrendous. It's an astonishing history. It's a very interesting affair to read about. But as far as being unified, no, this has never happened. This has never been. Jeffrey Boots, in his book, The Brother of Jesus and the Lost Teachings of Christianity, this is his PhD dissertation. It's published from Inner Traditions, 2005. In his discussion of orthodoxy and heresy, this is on page 161, James Dunn, one of the Christian scholars, believes that when one tries to get to the roots of the earliest, most primitive strand of belief about Christianity, and from where the diversity of Christianity sprang, where you end up is in the middle of Jewish Christianity. Well, this seems obvious, except to us. Of course, the successors of Jesus was his brother James, and they were fully going, full-blooded Jews, law-observing Jews. James Dunn wants to examine the three distinguishing features of later Jewish Christian communities, such as the Ebionites, that is, the faithful adherence to the law of Moses, the reverence for James, Jesus' brother, and an adoptionist Christology. Dunn sees something that the majority of Christian scholars would prefer to ignore. Here's Dunn's idea. If these are included, or if these are indeed the three principal features of heretical Jewish Christianity, then a striking point immediately emerges. Heretical Jewish Christianity would appear to be not so very different from the faith of the first Jewish believers. Now, this is shocking. Let's go through this. The three main tenets of Jewish Christian belief and practice that Dunn enumerates are what led to the Jewish Christians being labeled as heretics by the emerging Catholic Church. The Jewish Christians, on the other hand, who were so thoroughly rooted in the teachings of James and the apostles, thought that the Pauline churches were the heretics. And this brings us to the trickiest question of all in the study of Christian origins. What is orthodoxy and what is heresy? Dunn notes something interesting that happened by the 2nd century. There was no uniform concept of orthodoxy whatsoever.